how you doing? I'm Gabby. Welcome to another episode of the Happier Life Project, brought to you by free mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self, in partnership with the Priory Healthcare. Today we are looking at what it means to be a man amongst men in today's society, and how living up to cultural, generational and societal expectations of how a man should behave and should present, which of course have been heavily influenced from the projections of film, the media and social media, puts an enormous strain on a man's mental health. What does it mean to be a real man? And if you don't fit the definition of, what does that make you? Today's guest, Alex Holmes, is an award-winning mental health podcaster, writer, mental health coach, trainee therapist and workshop leader. Alex has spoken extensively on the mental health of men and boys, taking an intersectional approach by looking at the impacts of gender, race, sexuality and ability on our mental well-being. Alex is author of Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging and Connection, highlighting some of the main areas men struggle to open up about, whilst debunking masculinity myths and explaining why manning up needs to have a new meaning. Alex is also ambassador for two fantastic organisations, Beyond Equality, who help educate boys on masculinity and prevent gender-based violence, and he also works with leading men's mental health charity Movember. We've got so much ground to cover in today's topic of conversation, and I really want to give the floor to Alex for as long as possible. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Alex Holmes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I want us to jump straight in because everybody knows who you are now. And I thought at the start of the episode, what we could do is look at the definitions out there of what does it mean to be a real man. And then at the end of the episode, I'm going to ask you for your definition. Okay. This is going to kind of be the through line of the conversation. So when I typed into Google, what does it mean to be a real man? On the first page, I'm going to share three definitions that came up. Interestingly, the first one was taken from a dating coach website for men. Okay. Yeah, so get ready. A real man is a man with genuine self-confidence and true masculinity. He is a man who knows his own mind and knows what he's about in life, and he's not afraid to stand up for what he believes in. When a man has these qualities, he has a natural self-assuredness that makes him stand out head and shoulders above other men. And women feel an instinctive sexual attraction towards him because he has what it takes to protect her and provide for her, allowing her to relax into being a woman in the relationship. He knows how to be successful with women because he knows what really attracts women to men. He doesn't have to try too hard to get a woman's attention because women automatically sense his confidence and very masculine presence, and they work hard to get his attention and be selected by him. And that was the first thing that came up. I'm going to read all three and then ask for your opinion once I've shared them. The next one comes from the Urban Dictionary, where people, anybody can write this. So, well, I'll see what you think. A real man is what young folks might call old-fashioned. Chivalry is not dead. A real man has manners, is polite and considerate. He is honest and open and true to himself. He will fight for and defend the people that he loves. He is a hard worker. He is not spiteful. He respects women and shows appreciation for all of his blessings. A real man is the provider of the family. He is strong physically and mentally and is never too proud to exhibit strong emotion. Once committed, he's faithful only to his partner. He does not watch porn or disrespect his partner in any other way. He helps with housework and is a role model for his children. A real man knows who he is, what he wants, and is grateful for what he has. If you are 25 and living in your parents' basement, you are not a real man. Okay, and the third one, this is my particular favourite, and it's taken from the Indian Times.
Okay.
A real man does not derive his power from chasing women down streets. He does not need to drink himself silly to feel powerful, nor does he need a band of yes men to boost his morale. A real man does not derive validation from female attention, nor does he derive his sense of power from his politician father. A real man's power resides in his innate values, his sense of balance, intellect, his ability to hold his own in any situation, and his mature handling of relationships. A real man treats a woman as an equal and a partner rather than as an object. A real man is allowed to feel, to emote, to love, to cry, and to have his weak moments. A real man is human, and like all humans, he can be both strong as well as vulnerable. And that one was written by a female. The other two were written by males.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just looking up because I wrote down a definition for myself I was using, and I'm just trying to figure out where I put it. But those
No
are really
problem.
interesting points. What do you think about them?
There are some good points for sure. In 2023, I thought there might have been something more relevant now, considering how much the conversation has opened up. The lady, the journalist in India for the Indian Times, I think to me, I resonate more with that description more than any other.
Mm,
And it surprised me as well coming from India because I recently came back from 9 weeks in India. So I also saw the
I,
imbalance between males and females in terms of, how they navigate through culturally and society and all of that.
mm,
Yeah, what the second one sounds like a bit of a numpty, if I'm honest.
yeah, it's Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, it's the Urban Dictionary. But yeah, I mean, I can also share with you that then I went on to, I thought, well, hey, let's get back on the Google and ask the same question, but
Mhm.
replacing male with female. So when I typed in, what does it mean to be a real woman? The results were a lot less intimidating.
Mm,
And one line that jumped out at me without even clicking on anything was, a real woman is every woman.
okay.
So did you
Yeah,
want to share your definition now rather than
yeah.
at the end?
Now, yeah, I could share it now.
Okay.
So yeah, I've been working through trying to understand what a wholehearted, mindful, or integrated masculinity would look like. And I've been working with this idea around a masculinity that focuses on exploring life in a courageous and compassionate way, trying to because my whole thing is about trying to encourage people to live wholeheartedly, right? So the definition that I came up with was one for a mindful man, or quote unquote a good man. A mindful man is a man who has the capacity to engage with life fully in an authentic, courageous, and compassionate way, while embracing his imperfections, learning who he is, and showing the world who he is in the process. And the reason he does this is because he has the ability to trust, to move into non judgment, to embrace acceptance, embodies patience, is humble, present, and can let go of the things that cause him and others suffering. And the reason that I kind of brought this together was because for me, I just found that for too long, a lot of men have been hiding in caves and kind of been in the dark for a lot of their lives. And none of them have had the ability, not to say none of them, but typically we've been socially conditioned to not have the ability to talk about the things that are going on with us, to share those things, to really partake in community. And when we hide in a cave, it's dark, it's dank, it's very much covered in darkness. And what that looks like as a metaphor is just a struggle for your mental health, your emotional well-being, your physical, and even your spiritual health. And this is why I talk about the idea of stepping out of that space and creating the need for for help as an imperative, and we need to be able to learn and understand vulnerability and empathy in a way that isn't I don't want to say that isn't debilitating for our masculinity, but kind of adds to it in a
Mm,
sense. So that's where I come from when it comes to a lot of these definitions, because like you, I've read a lot of those definitions and I didn't see myself in any of those things.
yeah.
But there's room for us to start having conversations about what it means to be a man, because we're not actually having that conversation, really. We're
Mm,
having conversations about what it means to be a woman a lot in the news and in a lot of things. We're having loads of those conversations, but we're not actually having conversations about what it means to be a man. I think that's a conversation that we're kind of skirting around
yeah.
um, quite a bit, and I find that quite interesting.
Mm. So who do we need to call to get your definition on the top of Google searches?
Oh, the powers that be,
I know, right?
powers that be, yeah. And it's funny because my book, Time to Talk: How Men Think About Love, Belonging, and Connection, is centered around 6 real man myths, and it basically deconstructs them in a way to help men actually see that a lot of this stuff is not our individual making, but as a collective, as
Yeah.
men, is
Yeah.
our collective making. And there are so many things we're just born into, and there are so many things we just do because we think that it is something that we should be doing. And it's
Right.
not until we reach a particular point in our life cycle that we start to understand that the way that we were living or the things that we were doing wasn't working.
Mm.
Some people learn that earlier, some people learn that later, but it is something that is learned. And I think we could do better, like, do better trying to spend time deconstructing what that means.
Mm. Well, you mentioned before about like being in a cave, and it's almost like still that conditioning of acting like a bit of a caveman,
Yeah.
which actually repels, quite a few women and men as well. But there still seems to be, perhaps it is because the conversation isn't opened up enough.
Mm.
But and why at this point, Alex? Why is it not opened up enough?
I think that I don't even know if there's a simple answer for this, but one of the answers is misogyny. Um, Keep the limelight off of men and on women in all areas, because women will, once you start policing women and start putting women under a critical gaze and looking at them like, deeply, you can avoid looking at what it means to be a man, because it's something that a lot of men don't know how to answer. And
Mm,
a lot of the time, it is filled when you do ask a man what a man is. They will list off, depending on the generation of man that you're speaking to, they will probably lift off very stereotypical things centered around the physical and centered around
yep.
strength. But they're not, but and very rarely do they do we talk about things that make us human.
Mm,
I think the moment, and I think it's done by that, it's done by design in that way, because the moment men start looking at themselves as valuable people outside of what they do in the world, and look at themselves as valuable based on who they are, there will be a drastic change in how the world functions. Men are pretty much conditioned to sacrifice their bodies from a very early age in order to prove themselves as being true to their assigned gender, whether that be physical combat sports, whether that be war and the military, whether that be, going into professions which require huge amounts of physical exertion, such as the fire brigade or the police force, or any sort of role that requires physical, you know, masculine courage, which requires you to go into places where people wouldn't usually go and to do things that people wouldn't usually do. There's room for all of this stuff. My concern is more to do with what actually happens when, or how do we deal with the emotional strains of these things, when we realize that we are no longer robots, and we can't just do the things, we can't just do everything, we can't jump as high as we used to, we can't go as low as we used to, we can't run
mm,
as fast as we could, and we can't lift as heavy as we used to. And that's just a natural thing that occurs with age. And then as we age, people begin to feel like they're useless and they're put aside, and then they just kind of ignored until the end of days. And then I think that that's not usually how older people are typically understood or respected in other communities and cultures. They everybody has a purpose and everybody has a place.
Mm.
But the way that we see it in our society today is that, men have a particular purpose up until a particular point. Women have a particular purpose up until a particular point until they become useless. And that is the system that we're in. So I
Yeah.
begin to endeavor down that road of what does it mean for us to do and be the people that we know we are.
Mm.
So asking questions around what is it like, or what does it mean to be a man is important. What is a quote unquote real man is important. The same way, what is a real woman and what is a woman is important.
Mm.
We need to know and need to understand those questions, but we need to be able to sit down and have those conversations wholeheartedly.
I agree. When I was doing my research, and I've read it, well, I say when I've read your book, I've listened to your book, I bought it on Audible, but
Still reading.
and still
reading.
reading with my ears. There's a lot of common themes in terms of areas that both men and women struggle with: self-esteem, self-worth, self-doubt, fear of failure, intrusive thoughts, imposter syndrome, body issues. Would you say that men are suffering more because they're less likely to talk about it and seek help?
Yeah, I generally operate through several obstacles that men experience, right? And one of those obstacles is shame. Now, shame is very, very embedded into patriarchal understanding and masculinity itself. If there's no shame, then the patriarchy undoes itself. Shame is there in order to keep people in line and keep people in a particular box, to keep them to conform to the standards of what is expected of you in that gender. So if there's a certain, and I think a call to men call this the man box culture, right? And if you have in this box several rules that men have to follow and adhere to socially and culturally, and they don't happen to abide by one of these rules by choice or by nature or by virtue or whatever, or by ability or whatever, then you are shamed into feeling less than a man. So now, if we look at one of the real man myths with Richard, I don't know how far you are in the book, but one of them is real men don't have any worries or anxieties about their bodies. I like, so growing up, you're kind of expected to be, not every man is expected to be athletic, but you are expected to not necessarily have a care about your body in the same way that women or girls do.
Right.
Men their appearance is not necessarily attached to their worth in the same way, until they reach, peak dating age, and they have to start looking at their appearance, and they start beginning to feel like what men look for in women, they must look for in themselves. And because there is a lot of there, and you can probably tell me whether this is true or not. I mean, I'm not 100% sure whether you're attracted to men or not, but a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at is like women don't necessarily find men attractive in the same way that men look for in women. And I found that really interesting, because for a long time growing up, I was kind of beating up my body in order for it to look quote unquote attractive, so that women, anybody could find me attractive, or I could actually be seen to be attractive to other people. It's not until I grew older that I realized that that was not necessarily the case. It's down to me and what I look for in myself that allows me to my own personal standards for me that allow me to do that.
I think when you're talking about attraction, regardless even of like sexuality, in terms of like body types, then that just varies, person to person, doesn't it? What somebody defines as attractive, somebody else might be like, no, that's too skinny for me. And it does get very
Exactly. It does get that. But when you're kind of put into this box of
Right.
what it is that you're supposed to look for
Yeah.
as what it's meant to be attractive. And
Yes.
you may feel
Yes.
like, oh, I don't find that attractive, but I should. But if that's the kind of men that people find attractive, I should look like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm guessing it is the same for women and girls.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
imagine it too, you know.
Well, I feel like I should take that thread and run with it because I did want to get some more insight from the perspective of a male. He's a student called Will who's studying in mental health. And he had some things he wanted me to ask you to get your opinion on. And when we're talking about the body issue stuff, he said about the expectations in modern body image striving for Love Island perfection.
Mm,
And yeah, that's amplified, isn't it? Because they're usually just wearing a bikini or shorts.
yeah, yeah. Love Island's really interesting. I think that I stopped watching it a while ago just because it made me feel bad about myself in multiple areas. But one of the areas in for the context of the thread that we're going down is body image. Would I like at the time I did not feel comfortable like, you know, going topless or, you know, being physically present in that way. And then they're consistently working out there and they're doing all these different things,
Right.
which again is not even their fault as individuals. It's just what they do as part of the thing. But again, it's creating the culture, it's creating the understanding of what that looks like. I mean, we're always shifting the goalposts over generations around what it means to look and feel attractive to so many different people. But I think that for men, there has been this kind of unwritten rule or this kind of context of you have to be able to look as if you can defend yourself in order for you to be a strong or be considered a man who is worthy of calling himself such. Right? Which is why when, you know, when we grow up, I mean, I'm a millennial, we grew up with Disney Channel and these different shows, and you know, we're watching the stereotypes on screen of when kids are at high school, you've got the popular people who tend to be the girls that look one
Cheerleaders.
way and the guys
Yeah.
that look one way, so
The
they're the popular
jocks.
ones,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the girls that don't look one way and the guys that don't look one way. So there's just the alternative girls or the geeky guys or the guys who aren't necessarily outwardly attractive or obviously attractive to other people. That's telling us stuff as kids, as young people. That's actually portraying to some
Yeah.
extent real life, but it's telling us stuff like how we fit into these things socially.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Um,
conditioning without us
yeah,
even realizing it. We're just watching a movie or a TV show.
yeah, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And you know, if you're, you know, as a boy, you're put into those kind of environments. You're put into those sporting environments, into active environments. A lot of boys do become frustrated physically and emotionally, and you know, and we do develop a bit later than girls as well. So there are certain things that we're kind of figuring out in different ways, which all needs to be honored as a part of childhood and understanding what it means as a developing human, right? But when you're kind of pushed to those physical pursuits and those sorts of things, you're not necessarily looking at how to be internally. I think we grow up quite imbalanced. Things like reading, writing, introspection is not necessarily seen as something very masculine. And that's, you know, that's a kind of a hangover from the Victorian era in a very particular way. So if you're not kind of conditioned to do all of that stuff growing up, then you go onto the football pitch, you go into these pitches, and you know when your team loses, you have a tantrum, and your tantrum is a big outburst. And but people accept men's anger or irritation or annoyance on the field or in those sorts of areas. But if we go back to the body image stuff, it's just about us knowing that, especially in the chapter that I spoke about, it's about reframing how we look at our health and our well-being. Like
Yeah.
I go to the gym often and I do it because I want to look after myself. The looking good comes as a benefit. The looking good to me comes as a benefit. But I know that I use that moment to take time for myself, look after myself, and keep my body functioning. Because in order for a body to function, it needs strength, flexibility, and cardio work to be able to keep it agile. So, because I'm thinking when I get to 80, I want to be able to, you know,
Absolutely.
just be physically able to do stuff like, and yes, I'll be old, but I want to be able to be like, not kind of put down with loads of different ailments and stuff. So it's about balance and understanding why we're doing those things. I'm not in the gym or like a lot of people are just because they want to
Beef up.
be beef up or be more attractive to somebody else. When I think first it starts with you really appreciating who you are and then doing that. So I think we kind of have it backwards.
Yeah, I want to go back to that sort of the self-love side of things and acceptance as well, but just staying on body image, because I found this kind of interesting. It must be actually quite it's a confusing time for a guy as well, because on one hand there's the kind of still that sort of stereotype macho sort of figure that you see a lot in movies and whatnot. But then on the other hand, like the beauty business is changing for men and the perception of beauty, because there was a number of leading cosmetic surgery procedures for men in the UK in 2021. The most common one was a nose job. Number 2 was eyelid surgery. Number 3 was ear correction. Number 4 was breast reduction, and number 5 was liposuction. So there's an increase in men actually getting cosmetic surgery as well. So especially if you think about something like liposuction and breast reduction and things like that, it just seems that it must be like really confusing for a guy. It's like, well, how do I navigate all of this? Because I'm supposed to be rugged and macho, but then I'm also supposed to be like hairless and lean. And
Where was that survey taken? Where was this?
it might have been from the Harley Street. Well, I'll have to get back to you.
So
on...
it's UK. Is it UK?
Yeah, it's UK. It's UK stats. Yeah, from 2021.
Okay. That's really sad, but I do think that with a lot of this stuff, I do think it's important to consider context as well. Like we don't know why a lot of people are going through this, because sometimes it's not just these are aesthetic things, right? And I understand it, but we have to put into context bullying and bantering a lot of the time. I know somebody who got ear correction surgery because his ears came quite far over when he was younger, and he was consistently bullied for it, so we got them corrected. People want their teeth to be different if they have gaps, or if they're not necessarily how they like, and it's trying to meet a standard
exactly
that we're very unsure of where the roots are. But it is rooted in our culture of perfection and what that looks like for who kind of gets the attention and who gets that sort of stuff. And these are the things that breed incel culture and breed these really dark areas of masculinity, where a lot of men don't feel like they're able and they have this deep anger because they don't feel like they have the ability to kind of be attractive, feel attractive, or get the sort of attention that they feel that they should get. A lot of people, because they're made to feel less worthy of themselves. It is a lot. But yeah, those are really, really shocking stats.
Yeah. Well, I've got more.
Okay.
This is from our partners at the Priory Healthcare, and they asked 1,000 men about their mental health. So, according to this data, the biggest cause of mental health issues in men's lives are, and it was actually quite close between work pressure and financial issues. They were both at 32% and 31%, and then their health was 23%. 40% said they've never spoken to anybody about their mental health. 29% are too embarrassed to speak about it. 20% say there is a negative stigma on the issue. Is there still a negative stigma, do you think, for men in terms of opening up about their mental health? Is that something that is from generations past, that we're kind of still in the midst of the aftermath, and it's...
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Definitely. Even though it's changing at a micro speed, and I'm kind of really pushing for that to kind of change by creating my my programs and my coaching and all that kind of things, it's very, very slow. It is very, very slow because there's so many different things that our men just don't have the capacity to deal with. If you think about in general, this is not typical for everybody. You know, what I'm saying is a generalization, but it may land for some listeners in some way. But if you think about a child, boy, girl, whatever, there are two ways in which this boy and girl are conditioned growing up. And I think one of the books that really kind of highlighted this for me. I was aware, but I wasn't 100% aware of what that looked like from the perspective of a man. Was a book called Lewis and Louise. I don't know whether you've heard it, but it basically follows the protagonist is it's a dual protagonist where one child is born to these parents, but on one side of the story it's a boy, and on one side of the story it's a girl. So one's born Lewis and one's born Louise, and the story is told in parallel of one another, and of what the expectation and the kind of conditioning and socialization that happens throughout the novel. So all the events that happen are pretty much the same, but they interact differently with each of the protagonists. They interact differently based on whether they are a man or woman. And that was really interesting to me. But when you have children, like boys and girls, boys are taught very quickly that there's no space for their feelings in certain areas, especially once they reach the ages of 10, 11. I think when they're a child, it's pretty much okay, generally, you know, to have a child who has a tantrum, a child who cries quite a bit, you know, a boy, you know what I mean? But as soon as they start to reach the ages of 10, 11, those sorts of behaviors are you know, generally pushed out of them. They're pushed to, you know, develop a competitive edge. They're pushed to develop a certain thing away from femininity, away from that. And this kind of socialization I found is just really interesting, that as we grow older, if we're saying that, you know, our emotions aren't valuable as boys, we then start to keep secrets, we start to keep things away from people, we start to have these things deep down in us, and that challenges the way that we connect with a lot of different with our friends and different people, whereas girls are generally taught that sharing is important, and they learn these things, and obviously we learn these things from our parents. You know, typically we learn those behaviors about what it means to be a man or a woman. Nowadays, you know, like same-sex relationships, not gender non-conforming relationships, and whatnot. I can't speak for those families because I don't know, but you know, in my family, with regards to, like, you know, male dad, female mom, it was my sisters would learn something very specific from my mum, and I would learn something very specific from my dad. And that would have been the case for a lot of us growing up.
You shared in the book that you did have struggles as a kid, and certainly in your adolescence at that kind of age that you're referring to, when I guess you had your struggles because you were confused by the messaging versus your authentic self, which was developing, right?
Yeah, the actions. Yeah. So you kind of live an incongruent life. You know, you feel deeply, but you can't show it. You think broadly, but you can't think too broadly or outside of things. And in some ways, the freedoms that boys and girls have are just so, like, tend to have external freedom, and girls tend to have internal freedom, in a sense, in a way. You can
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong. This is just what I'm observing. So, you know, boys can walk back late at night. They can, you know, do all the things like climb trees and go travel wherever. You know what I mean? People don't tend to quote unquote care generally.
Yeah, it's
There's a
true.
lot more restrictions being placed on girls based on the society that we live in, but girls actually tend to form friendships deeper, build those connections wider, and are able to connect on a deeper level than men. So when we get to men now at this age and they start to, things start to happen, relationships break down, career isn't the way that they thought it was going to be, struggling with parents, struggling as parents, not knowing how to be as a husband, unlearning a lot of stuff that they thought was actually normal that their parents did. There's a huge shift and change in a lot of men if they are willing to accept and allow this change to happen.
Do you think as well, like, if men formed deeper connections, because you're right, again, I don't want to like typecast or anything, but I do think about, you want to be in a tribe, right? That's just, everybody wants to find their tribe, but sometimes you don't, and I'd imagine more so for guys as well, you don't necessarily find your tribe, as in you feel completely at peace with everybody, but you kind of put that mask on and you do the bravado and you go down the pub and you drink more than you'd like to because that's what everybody else is doing, or you get Larry at a football game. Again, I know I'm being stereotypical here, but just in the context of, I don't think in terms of from the female perspective, the expectation isn't there to necessarily behave quite in that way, in a way that sort of conforms to what's expected, like that way with the lads kind of thing.
Yeah, and that feeds back to the man box understanding what it means to be a man among men. And as soon as you step out of that space and you start challenging those sorts of behaviors, you're then deemed as a pariah, as somebody who isn't worthy of being in this group, which is why we have such huge issues with homophobia within masculinity, within transphobia, in masculinity, gender non-conforming, things of that nature. And, just even if you just dare to challenge some of the ideas, some of the behaviors that a lot of men enact or reenact, especially towards women and even more so towards themselves, you are then deemed as a traitor or a betrayer or someone that can't be trusted, all of these different things. So yeah, there are just a bunch of rules. You go to a football match and that's an acceptable place to cry if your team lose. But you crying because you can't afford to pay your bills and you're struggling to do that at home, and your partner and kids are looking at you thinking, what is it that what can we do? What do we need to do? Tell me what's wrong. And you can't say, because you're just thinking, I've got to just get this sorted. I can't show them weakness. I can't show them anything. Like it's the priorities of the thing are all over the gap. And it's these things that I am unlearning and have been unlearning for a while. And I will be unlearning a lot of things as my time continues, because there's a whole load of programming that has been put into me, and I feel like I've done quite a good job at deprogramming myself over time, and venturing down the career that I'm in as a mental health coach and training as a psychotherapist and working within the field, and having facilitated men's groups and curating men's groups and working with men. And I'm seeing a lot of men. I've seen where I was back 5-10 years ago in a lot of men who are coming to me now. I'm just like, I've been there. I've seen what it is that you're going through, and I've seen where you are coming from, and there is a way through that. But unfortunately, because a lot of men don't have that, I talked about the obstacles earlier, didn't I? When I said shame was one of them, and none of one of those obstacles is worthiness. And if you start to progress through shame, and you're living in that shame cycle, you move through to a feeling of unworthiness. And when you start to get to a place of unworthiness and you start feeling that you have no value and you have no positive contributions to your life or the world, and your connections are very shallow, and all of these different areas that are troubling you, when you start to move through that, that's when depression and anxiety become hooked on at its deepest and darkest moments, and that can lead to things like suicide and other just physical manifestations of the depression and of the stress that can lead to negative thinking patterns, that can lead to negative coping mechanisms and the like. So, and leading you towards the depths of despair. And I think that that's something that I'm really passionate about helping men not reach that place.
Yeah.
But so many men have reached that place of darkness. I've reached that place of darkness. And I'm not saying only men
Yeah.
get there, but if we're talking about contextually, if we were talking about specifically in this conversation, then yeah, it's important. It's just the routes to getting there are slightly different with regards to men, women, and binary folk.
And what do you think in terms of, I guess, from your perspective and maybe from some of the other men that you speak to as well, when you're heading towards the darkness, what would have pulled you back? What was lacking in terms of maybe resources or
Yeah, I
like
think
a safe listening space,
yeah,
perhaps?
you know what? I think it does start with if you're somebody who has a very, very, very small internal locus of evaluation, right? So your inner voice, your in your self-talk, right? If you've got a very small and unaffirming voice that can't break through when you are going through these dark moments, it's going to be very difficult for you to pull yourself out of those moments. Um, so this is when we require other people to help us bring ourselves into different areas, into different spaces, right? So my whole thing again is about helping people develop strength within their, there's a part in the book about, negative and positive self-talk. And we have to be able to talk to ourselves in better ways and begin to affirm that voice in ourselves and get used to hearing us encourage ourselves, champion ourselves, back ourselves. But it's hard because we all come from different backgrounds and different experiences. And our earliest critical voices come from our caregivers. When we do something wrong, when we do something that's not in line, or when we're challenged on who we are and all these different things, and like for example, if you do something wrong now, whether you drop something and it smashes, or you're going back for your fourth or fifth biscuit when you know that you think to yourself, well, I didn't want to go back after the third one, but you're going back to the fourth and fifth one. Typically, there's a voice that comes up in you that is either scolding or compassionate. And a lot of the time, depending on how you're raised, that scolding voice is your caregiver, is your parent, is the person who has some sort of emotional power or over you in some particular way. And that kind of builds into your own self-critical voice. I mean, I recognized this once when I was with friends at his birthday, and it's like an Airbnb overnight place. And we were all kind of just, catching up, enjoying one another's company. I think one morning we were having breakfast and there was jam on the table. And I think I just said out loud, it's like, oh, I shouldn't really be having jam. And they were like, why? Why shouldn't you be having jam? And then I just thought, I don't even know why I said that out loud, number one. And then number two, I was like, it's funny because growing up, I was never allowed jam sandwiches. Like jam
Because of the sugar?
sandwiches, because of the sugar. My mom said it was unhealthy, but my friends were always having jam sandwiches at lunchtime, whatnot. But my mom would make me like ham sandwiches or tuna
No.
sandwiches, corned beef sandwiches. And you're just like, as a child, you're like, oh, this is just like whatever. I know that it's nutritionally good now, but
Yeah.
as a young person, as a child, you're like, oh, I just want something sweet. I want it is really nice. Well, my friends have it and whatnot. But over time, it just became that kind of thing of like jam is bad, jam is bad, jam is bad when you have it outside of breakfast or outside of these sorts of things. As you grow older, you start to kind of undo those sorts of those things for yourself. So when you get into those dark places, it's those critical voices, and depending on how strong they are, you're going to need help from outside of you to kind of help bring you and build your inner voice or your inner self talk up. And then once you become a bit more comfortable with your inner voice and encouraging and becoming a friend to yourself, then when you do get to those dark places, the way back sometimes is easier. Not always, but sometimes.
How much responsibility should women take for these projections on men to feel a certain way? Again, it's this trickling through, isn't it? It's generational. But like, how much are women fanning the flames as well as men?
I guess it's a question of like some women who have been conditioned in a particular way to, feel deserving of particular things from men, depending on how they grew up, their own experiences in relationships, their own experiences as friends and whatnot. They project those things onto men the same way that men who have had particular experiences with women and grown up in a particular way project those particular experiences onto women. I think accountability is a mutual one. I think, but again, because everybody's fighting for power and ground and ownership of something, there's never kind of a submission between the two people or the two people within a relationship or within an environment that allows them to say, I understand where you're coming from. This is what I'm coming from. Can you hold what I'm saying? And then learn from those particular things, because everybody has a story, and everyone's playing into that in some particular way. And I think that when it comes to like women, what they can do to support men in this way, I would say is just to find a way to help him trust the situation. And I guess that does start with those honest conversations and really getting to know one another and not being afraid of going there. Because these conversations are difficult, and a lot of men don't even have the reason. A lot of men will just be like, I think I did see a stat, and they said 70% of women are the ones that in a heterosexual relationship are the ones that initiate divorces or initiate the ending of a relationship. And what that says to me is that a lot of men don't have the confidence to end a relationship. Rather than it being women are consistently being unhappy in a relationship, a lot of men aren't necessarily aware or necessarily confident enough to end the relationship when it doesn't meet their own needs, because we don't speak about the stuff, and we don't speak about what is ending and what is ending and when our needs aren't met. So it becomes a one-sided battle. And if you're in a relationship with somebody who is clear about the things that they want and clear about the things that they need, but then they're not getting anything back from the other person, then they are going to reach that point of, I do not want to be in this relationship anymore. I am done. I'm leaving. And you're going to have to do it. And then, men have this thing where they're just like, oh, I'm blindsided. I never knew this was coming. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
You just didn't want to accept that it was coming. Yeah, I recently had a conversation, somebody who's, ended their relationship. And he was like, oh, do you want to get counseling? Do you want to do all these things? And she's like, I literally said this last year. I wanted to get counseling. You didn't want it. We are here now. Relationship's ending. That ship has sailed, sort of thing. So I do think it's a two-way street. I think that there is a way to do it. There needs to be a give and a take. There needs to be an acceptance of an understanding, but men are slightly behind in that area of really understanding who they are and having those conversations. So again, it's a complex question to answer.
So if we notice a man in a loved one, a man is shutting down, there's clearly something going on, because as you've explained, sharing how you're feeling, fears, vulnerabilities, guys don't find very easy. And in terms of supporting them and offering them this compassionate listening space without judgment, where they can feel safe to talk freely, which perhaps is the first step for getting help. What do you advise, regardless of sort of sex, if there's a loved male in your life that clearly is struggling but isn't opening up about it? Because I think sometimes as well it can be difficult when you're not getting anything, not getting a response, or perhaps it's like that misdirected anger.
It's about the approach. It's about the approach. No one likes to be blindsided, and men sure as hell do not like to be humiliated. So, which is a whole separate conversation in itself. Which is why there's a phrase that's like bullying works, because it gets people to do stuff, you coerce them, but it's not helpful in a lot of ways. Yeah, no one likes to be blindsided, but it's down to how people approach people. When people start to go through like a depressive cycle, they stop doing the things that are joyful to them, the things that they enjoy, right? If they read loads because they enjoy it, and they haven't picked up a book in a while, you can start looking and thinking, what's going on there. But it's all about taking them outside of the environment. I think men are we're very active people. If you said, "Oh, let's go for a walk or let's do something," and you go, and then you can kind of broach the conversation in a way. There, I think there's loads of different ways to do it, but it all depends on the individual. It all depends on the individual, and depends how much you know them as well. Um, but I would say, for me, it's about being as courageous as you can in approaching the conversation. It's fine to say, "I've noticed that you are is something going on." You can ask that 2 or 3 times, and then there may be an answer. But if there isn't, I wouldn't push it, but I would make them know that I'm there for them as they need it, and I'll persistently check in to make sure that things are going on. And a lot of men don't necessarily like the attention on them in that way either. Sometimes they'll just be like, "Oh, I should." Again, it's that whole thing. I shouldn't be feeling this way, and you shouldn't necessarily have to be asking me about how I am, because internally there's this a whole load going on.
Yeah.
That they can't make sense of.
Right.
So slowly undoing that and being able to build trust again and being able to trust what's happening, it is a slow process, but we can't rush results.
Speaking of courage, there's a line in your book which I loved. Strength is being brave enough to take action when issues arise. So when we get back to what does it mean to be a real man and the words strength and courage emerge, I think we should reframe that to mean emotionally and mentally rather than what is out of date and is stereotyped. When we're talking more physically in terms of like your firefighters or working out at the gym. So as we're starting to wrap things up, Alex, I ask every guest to set the listeners some homework based on the theme of the episode. So in this case, what is a simple, actionable step that we can take when it comes to supporting men in their mental health? And I guess maybe we've covered that in a little bit just now, but that will help us on our mission to building a happier life.
For men, I would say get comfortable with venting what is going on with you. Be comfortable with sharing what's happening. If you've had a long day at work, share what went on. If you've had an issue with one of your friends, share what went on. Obviously, and begin to build that level of discernment where you know who you can trust, and kind of like, you're not just kind of dumping it on the random Joe in the coffee shop, but you're
Yeah.
you're able to do it with somebody that won't judge you. But for people that are in your life, if you have a man in your life that you want to connect with, I would say the first thing that came to my mind was be patient. But sometimes that's very difficult when, it depends on what's at stake. I suppose help him trust you. Help him trust that this talking can help.
Absolutely.
Be able to hold his concerns.
And so going full circle to your definition of what does it mean to be a mindful man, could we hear it again?
Yeah, a mindful man is a man who has the capacity to engage with life fully in an authentic, courageous, and compassionate way while embracing his imperfections, learning who he is, and showing the world who he is in the process.
Love it. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For more on you, it's alexholmes.co.
Yeah, .co, that's the website. And, /book for the book, /podcast for the podcast. But
Yep.
everything is on there.
Awesome.
Get access to my newsletter. You can contact me about coaching or just anything in general, really, through there too.
Yeah, and the book, Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging, Connection, you can pretty much get from all your usual places.
Yep.
Whether you want to read it with your eyes or with your ears.
Yeah. For sure. If you want to hear my voice reading
That's
the
right,
book,
exactly.
Yeah, go for it.
There's a lot of good takeaways for women as well, when you're talking about addressing the negative thoughts and intrusive thoughts. That's what I mean about there are common grounds, aren't there?
What's really interesting is that a lot of women have taken a lot of messages from the book as well.
Yeah.
and they pass it on to the men that they want to connect with. So, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just opening up that conversation to start having about mental health, and for men to find a way to access it that is healthy.
Yeah, well, thank you for all the great work you're doing in that respect.
Not a problem. It's a labor of love, but we get there.
It's Gabby back with you. Thanks again to Alex Holmes, and thank you to you for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project. Just to clarify real quick on the survey, when Alex and I were discussing the rise of male cosmetic surgeries, that survey did come from the Harley Street Clinic in London's website. They linked it to the British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons, so I'm assuming that's where they got their data from. And now for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, that's me, and the interviewees. And the content of this podcast should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. The Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a review if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. So please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.